Hi everyone, I'm David Caplan and this is Real Live Happy Friday. I'm here with Mike Muse, Candice, Frederick, and our special guest this week, ABC News reporter Kelly McCarthy. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back. You were here a couple weeks ago.
What's up, Kels?
We wanted you back so much that we brought you here again to roast you, but we'll be very kind to you this time, though, right? So it's great to see you, and we see you're wearing the Real Live orange-ish color,
sure
so
am.
you're in the spirit of things. So we like that, though, right? You're a team player, right? Okay. So we're going to talk. The first topic is a topic that we keep hearing in Hollywood, body image in Hollywood, and it's a topic that typically plagues women, but males are not immune to this. The latest celebrity to talk about this is Demi Lovato. So she's taken to Twitter to say that she constantly in the past has been told by producers, female and male, that she has to lose weight. And she actually talks about an incident at the age of 19 when a photographer actually shamed her at a photo shoot, basically told her, put down that piece of cake, what are you doing? And she took to Twitter in response to Jennifer Lawrence saying that she was actually once put in a nude photo lineup with other actresses, and this was sort of in an attempt to be like, you know what, you better stay at a lower weight. Okay. So what is with this? Why do we keep having this conversation? Why does Hollywood want our actresses in particular to have this sort of unrealistic body image?
I think it's interesting.
I was going to say that.
I think what's interesting about it is it's media standards have been set so high for women. You know, I think we put these women in a very difficult place in understanding their identity in terms of Hollywood and movies and our pop stars and our female divas. Mm-hmm. And we also see it too in terms of our models. This has always been a topic of conversation that has always come up that sometimes is very unrealistic to the average woman who doesn't have the chef, who doesn't have the personal trainer to train them, right? And so what we see in Hollywood is these unrealistic ways of health and fitness that doesn't really translate to the average mainstream USA female who doesn't have the resources and the access to do that, to get their body to be snapped back after having birth and giving a baby. And so it puts these pressures on women to meet that standard that's so not realistic.
Absolutely. And I mean, off of that too, I think now we're in a space where not only are these actresses and maybe even models in a lot of cases, getting that influence to be skinny or thin or healthy, these unrealistic standards that aren't actually healthy for them. They're also being influenced because they're seen more on social media. People post things about them all the time, and it's constant. People are snapping photos of them. Just last week you saw Mandy Moore posted a photo where one user first pointed out, oh, you look so thin and it's unhealthy, and kind of put her on blast. And she, spoke back and she said, there's nothing wrong with my size, and I'm healthy, and I'm, the weight that I want to be at, and you can't judge my health based on a camera angle or a look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I do think that also actresses and other celebrities also shame other celebrities as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's not something that people talk about. And I think that there's also this element that people really consider Hollywood the prototype of just humanity, as scary as that is. But I think that that is creating such a hierarchical standard. Like, this is what everyone should look like, and this is what you guys look like. Well, it's creating that disparity, I think.
Well, let me ask, before, there's other questions I want to ask about this topic, but I have to throw in half reality, half devil's advocate here, right? Let's be real. Do we want to see a Jennifer Lawrence who is, 30 pounds, quote, and I'm using this in quotes, devil's advocate here, overweight? Do we want to see, an Emmy Rossum with, with a gut? I mean, at the same time, Hollywood, these people that we see on, TV screens, movie screens, they're also, mirroring society. I mean, we all want to lose weight, most of us. You know what I mean? We all want to be fit. We're sitting here. Are we really judging them? Are we being hypocritical? Most of us, we want to have that thin body as well. It's like, it's really like this cyclical thing. I mean, is it that different?
For me, as long as it's the actor's choice. So if it's an actress' choice to be of that size, then I support them with that.
Right.
But if it's the choice being made for them to be that because of some unrealistic standard that's being placed on them, then that is what I don't support. So if they choose to gain weight, I support that, as long as it's on their terms. But Kelly, you raised something really interesting when you talk about social media and Instagram. I would like to add something to the conversation, Caplan, when they talk about that, because most women who get celebrated on Instagram usually tend to be on the thicker side, the more curvy side. Those are a lot of females who get a lot of love and a lot of attention for their curviness, right? There's this body positive campaign that's really going on, and my friend Ravel Davis has been a part of that, to get women to embrace their curves and to celebrate their curves on the thicker side. I mean, let's look at individuals from like Kim Kardashian, right? In terms of people celebrate her body type. Some would say it's manufactured, right? But nonetheless, that's a standard now that people are heading to, is trying to get the implants, right? Just as maybe like 5 years ago, you saw the reverse of people trying to lose weight to lose the curve. And so I don't know what it will be like for an individual who, as a female, who will be watching that to understand what is beauty standards now and what's acceptable and what's not.
I just always think it's a little Pollyannic to be like, oh my God, a photographer at the photo shoot for Emmy Rossum's first photo shoot was like, put that piece of cake down. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Like, I was so offended. It's like, you know what? It was probably a fashion magazine cover, huge cover. It's like, you know what? It's not that surprising. Like, I can't be in this bubble and pretend that it was like so offensive, and that as a point of like militancy, she should stand there and eat like a bucket of chicken just to prove a point to this photographer.
Right, but it's almost like even off of just that statement alone is kind of the proof, right, that it's kind of this perpetual thing. It's almost like people expect that they're going to get shamed.
Well, there are people who embrace it, like Rihanna. Like we were talking before the show, Kelly and I were about like Rihanna. She embraces her weight fluctuations. Like, what do you think about someone like Rihanna who does that? She's like, you know what? You know, if you guys, I'm going to embrace all this.
I mean, I think to Mike's point, I mean, she's embraced the body positive attitude, right? And even recently she said, it's okay if your size or your weight fluctuates. And she says, whatever's healthy, whatever feels good to you is what you should be doing. And she even went as far as to say, dress in the clothes that make you feel the best. She said, before you get dressed, decide how you feel and then make a decision of what you're going to wear. Because until you feel good about you, it kind of, you know, that's the base of everything that everyone else is going to see.
And people are excited to see Rihanna at that size. And then even, Kelly, I'm glad you mentioned Rihanna, because then let's segue to Beyonce, right? Like after Beyonce's had her baby, she's picked up more curves on the top and on the bottom. And I swear every Instagram, every blog is out there is celebrating this new curvy Beyonce. And so it is being celebrated from that standpoint of view. So I think we begin to have to look at this lens of almost seeing this polar opposite. Like in one way, the standard is rail thin, and that gets celebrated. And then another instance, it's more curvy, and then that gets celebrated. Right?
Well, and I think it's also a cultural thing. You brought up two people of color. You just brought up two women of color, and I think that when we talk about, you know, eating disorders, when we talk about body image, it's very much through a white woman's gaze, and it's usually, you know, told like, you know, white women have the issues and not so much women of color. And so usually when we see like these conversations about body issues, it's usually the body positivity conversation is usually stemmed through women of color. Oftentimes because there's the fuller image, and so it's really about embracing it. You don't see that as much with white women, and when they talk about body
image. You mentioned that Ashley, the plus size model, mentions that a lot. She talks about, as a white woman, being this curviness, she had difficulty within her family, she had difficulty within her cities and her school districts.
Well, she grew up in a small town, and
she did.
You know, it was hard, and you know, people said even growing up that she should lose weight, and then look at her now. You know, she was the first plus size model on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
But I think, you know, for a lot of these, you know, we're talking about these women, it's always, you know, sometimes it is, even for, you know, public figures, it's outside the Hollywood gaze. Like Demi Lovato, for example, she's been very public about talking about body image, not necessarily, even though she, of course, she's a very public figure within the gaze of Hollywood. She's talked about it in terms of other issues that she has, you know, whether it's
health
issues, other personality issues that she's been dealing with. I mean, how does that affect sort of, and for her, it's taken a very personal toll. Do you know what I mean? When we're talking about the likes of an Emmy Rossum or even Rihanna, it hasn't really taken this like really deep mental toll. And I mean, think what type of tolls is taking on other young women, like mentally, when you look at someone like Demi Lovato, who it's clearly taken a much more mental health toll on them. I mean, what do you think this is doing to young women like that?
I think even younger than Demi Lovato. I mean, Demi Lovato also has a super young audience. So we're talking about like 10 to like 15-year-old girls who image is everything. I mean, they're growing up in the social media era where bullying is so prominent, where it's so expected, where it's just like you have to look a certain way, you have to be a certain way. They're constantly being judged, you know, partly they're also putting themselves out there, but also people are putting themselves out there as well, putting them out there on their behalf. So it's creating such a frenzy of just this hyper insecurity that I think is stemming through that Hollywood gaze.
But also, too, as you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned, Candice, the Hollywood gaze, but it's also happened to individuals who are not in Hollywood because there's something interesting with social media. Social media is very powerful, and social media has a way of really advancing our culture in ways, in our society, in ways that we haven't seen before. And so now, as a result, fitness is almost as popular a part of a conversation as in what did you watch last night? People want to know, are you meal prepping? You know, there's a lot of chefs who are on social media who get popularized by the meal preps. There's all these type of diets, the paleo diets, the vegan diets, right? Netflix had that one show called Healthy, Get Your Healthy. There's this big show on Netflix, sorry, I'm messing up the name of it, that really talked about the process of making food, how food is processed, you know, in terms of animals and the protection of them, and make people want to stop eating meat. And so food and health has now become such an everyday part of our conversation that we're constantly thinking about it. But then when you run that and juxtapose that to Hollywood and what you see on the media, we can't help but to always be thinking about our health now.
Well, now you made me want to think about food. And when I think about food, it's Friday. I want to think about movies. When I think about movies, I think about horror movies. With Halloween approaching, this is my little segue here. And I think about popcorn, right? And I think about Tyler Perry this weekend. Boo 2's opening. All right, so we're talking horror movies is a big genre, and in particular this year, it wasn't the greatest year for films, and this is where the genre of horror movies comes to the rescue, in theory, right? So in September, we saw the movie It. Huge movie, $123 million opening weekend. It was the highest movie, R-rated movie ever for opening weekend, right? And there's been a lot of chatter, particularly in, film critic circles, that horror movies really, may save this year at the box office, right?
Yeah.
And there's many theories, right? Some of them are, all you need is sort of like one good movie review, and then non-horror movie fans, they're like, okay, they get into it. Or one good horror movie, it's cyclical. You know what I mean? It kicks it off almost. So it becomes a great movie, then people get into it. So let me ask you guys, what is it? Can horror movie genres, can they really save a bad year of movies, or is it almost like this? It's just too much of a random genre.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of really interesting components there about why horror movies have been slaying at the box office.
Good word.
For lack of a better term, honestly, they've been killing it. And a lot of the reason is because, if you look at movies like Get Out, which did absolutely amazing at the box office. Same producer on, what was the other? Happy Death Day. He was the same producer on that movie. And he had a really low budget. He was under $5 million for both of those movies, I believe. And, you look at when you have kind of less of cooks in the kitchen almost in the production side saying like, here, take these notes, make these changes, and doing kind of all this like stuff, they kind of get to focus more on how they're producing the film and getting it just right, because they kind of have to, right? And they want to build something better product. And those two movies are two of the best this year in terms of horror. So, that's a big part of it.
Candice?
Yeah, I think that people are looking to horror not just because, I think people are looking to horror for escapism, but I think people are looking to horror because, yes, it's not like if this is your thing, whatever, but not another slavery movie, it's not another like a heavy drama. Horror has always really, but even particularly this year, really had been a part of the social consciousness, but has not gotten the credit it has deserved until this year. So now people are really talking about it in a way of Get Out. There's so much social commentary in Get Out. It tackles interracial relationships, racism. It talks about racial fear in the suburbs. Things is very blatant. It talks about things that people don't consider horror to actually tackle. It actually does that. It talks about bullying, things like that. So it's more than jump scares, which are great,
right,
but it has a social commentary, it has that narrative that we are already talking about in the social
So it's gone beyond sort of the typical slasher movies.
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you something. So as, horror movies have become sort of more, like mass, they're getting, wider appeal. So we're seeing this weekend Tyler Perry, Boo 2. So obviously there was, a Boo 1, initial Boo, right? So is this, let's say, let me throw this to you, Mike. So is this an example? Tyler Perry obviously is not a horror movie director. You know, he's not coming from Friday the 13th. He's not coming from Chucky. You know, that's obviously not his thing. We know this, right? So by Tyler doing this, is this an example of horror movies becoming more mass by having a director such as him doing a movie? I mean, and again, Boo, it's not a typical slasher movie, but the fact that we're even talking about it in the context of a horror movie genre, is this an example of a horror movie-esque genre becoming more mass?
Absolutely, and it kind of goes back to what Candice was saying. It's a great jump off for me, Candice, in terms of the jump scare movies. So what you're saying, not within just in Get Out and the way the character development is happening, but you see that across the board. You even look at the film It, right? So It was this group of misfits, if you will, students who weren't the cool kids, right? Students were a little bit more awkward, right? So now horror movies and the genre, they're developing the characters so much more better now, and it's allowing the genre to be expanded and have subcategories of horror, which allows for Tyler Perry to come in and make this very comedic aspect of Boo, right? And what's interesting about that is we're so familiar with some of the characters because they are very seen in Tyler Perry's other movies, and so it allows the characters to develop. So it's almost as what Tyler Perry has done was allow us to go on the journey with these individuals for the last couple of years, maybe even a decade now, and so it's allowing for that to happen. And I think, Caplan, the reason why that is too as well is because we're open for that now. Before, horror movies used to be just about blood and gore, so you wouldn't go, but now we see that on cable television consistently. So now we're immune. We're not immune, we're desensitized to seeing blood and gore. We want to have the same reaction to it. So now we're more open to go see it within a movie theater.
And what do you mean?
Earpiece keeps falling.
It's not. We're haunted by ghosts here. They're getting really
Sorry,
pissed off. And what do you think? I'm just curious. You know, to address Tyler Perry, obviously, you know, a lot of his films, you know, focus on African American storylines, and this sort of goes back a little bit to your point, Candice, where horror movies, you know, they're not like what they used to be. You know, they're tackling storylines. You're talking about, you know, interracial storylines and couples. I mean, the fact that even, and again, Tyler Perry's movie is not that traditional slasher movie, right? It's a comedic storyline, but just the fact that, you know, that he's doing it, you know, it's not your typical, you know, like white director doing it. Is that again just another nod to the fact that this genre is just continuing to evolve, really?
Yeah, I think people are seeing it as a genre that has representation of various people, women. There are a lot of women genre filmmakers. They don't really get their credit, but there's a lot of them coming out there, not only on the big screen, but also on the small screen. There are women of color. There are male filmmakers of color, including Jordan Peele, who really, to me, Get Out was so different than anything I've ever seen him do before. And so I wasn't really expecting him to do that, but it's really carving a space for these more marginalized filmmakers to create these stories that are, you know, that matter.
And I just want to say, and then before we go to our real talk, I just want to say, when you said small screen, the thing that popped in my head was American Horror Story. In the last few years, huge hit, and I think on the, you know, on the small screen on TV, that show has brought, you know, the genre of horror to so many people. Like I can't even think of another show on TV, at least in that genre, that became so huge. I never watched that before. And you're talking about representation. I feel like that show has been like a Noah's Ark of diversity. Like honestly, like there's been one of everything on that show. Do you know what I mean? And like I feel like when the casting notices go out for that show, it's like everyone can be on that show. Do you know what I mean? Like seriously, right? Everyone come on board, right? Okay, so keeping within the vein of horror movies, this week's Real Talk are our favorite horror movies, right?
Love it.
All right, so Kelly, we're going to start with, we're going to Get the Guest. We're going to go with you first, right?
So full disclaimer, I'm not the largest horror movie buff.
All right.
But I love seeing them when my friends force me to.
Okay.
And one of my favorites from a while ago, I think it was 2001, is The Others with Nicole Kidman. You know, psychological, huge plot twist at the end. And that was one of the first that I remember really loving as a horror movie. So definitely The Others.
Good choice. Yeah. Candice?
Mine is a throwback.
Okay, we're going to go old school now. Candice.
So my favorite era of horror has been the 70s. It's always going to be the 70s, likely. And so a definitive one for me is The Exorcist. I love the
That's a good one, yes.
Great acting, great. I mean, I've also read the book. I'm so obsessed with this narrative. And I also watched the series that's on now. But great performances. It's just, I love the idea or its commentary around religion and the devil and how it also, you know, manifests in this narrative.
All right, that's a good choice, Mike.
So I'm gonna land in between Kelly and Candice in terms of decades and do Nightmare on Elm Street.
Okay, that's a classic.
So yeah, so that
to
it
be
was
all week.
right. So that was my introduction to horror and Freddy Krueger and that creepy notion when they always say, "Whatever you do, do not go to sleep." You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so
that scares you.
On the phone, that was this
Johnny
iconic
Depp's
scene
first
for
film,
the.
guys.
Right.
Yeah,
breakout
and I
year for
remember
him.
everyone wanted to be Freddy Krueger for Halloween.
I was gonna
right?
say, yeah, it's a
Everyone wanted
classic.
the hand, the
People still do,
claws,
yeah.
the shirt, the mask. Right? I used to be
true.
petrified to go to sleep. I still can't watch The Exorcist. I still can't watch
Oh,
it.
it's so good.
Still
All right,
can't
good
watch it.
choice.
Favorite.
My choice is actually very current. It's The Purge. I actually love the Purge series, in particular The Purge election year. Very current. I love movies also that take place sort of in like the near future and that weird genre. And I think given all the craziness going on right now in the political landscape, it's really interesting. You know, basically The Purge, it's like the government has allowed you one day, one evening to basically do whatever you want, and they've mandated murder. It's just crazy. It's weird. You watch it, and I think you watch a movie like that, and you automatically think you're like, wait a second, if we really could do that,
This could never happen.
Yeah, like
This
this could never happen. What are you
maybe.
talking about, right? And then for a nanosecond, you're like, well, if it could, would you? You know, we won't go there. But it's I just love it, and I think that installment in particular also has some great actors in it that I really like. So
Ethan Hawke.
so we're gonna have to have a big
Nice
old
array, guys.
Yeah.
so we're gonna have a big old slumber party on Halloween then and watch
I'm
these
for
movies,
that.
right?
I'm for
All right,
that.
great job. This was fun, Kelly. Thank you so
Of
much.
course.
Thanks,
Good
Kelly.
job. All right.
And I'm sorry, sound booth for my earpiece. Don't be mad at me.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. All right, thanks for watching Real Live. We will see you next time, and have a great weekend. Bye.